Namaskar and thanks for joining us here on the Economic Brief, where we look at key stories from the worlds of economy, business and finance, and we contextualize them from local and global perspectives. On the program, we look at the challenges the Global South faces in meeting the SDGs, the finance being the biggest one. We'll assess how much of a role the US economy will face in the upcoming November elections. And also, has the Argentinian economy turned a corner? Our correspondent Aman Kumar Himanshu briefs us. We'll leave you with an assortment of business news in brief. So let's start by taking a look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted by the UN in the year 2015 after the Millennium Development Goals, and we are supposed to achieve them by 2030. These are absolutely vital for the planet. I mean, they both have an ecological point of view as well as an economic point of view. But the point is that as we continue to move on towards these SDGs, we are beginning to see that the Global South is lagging behind. And the biggest issue that keeps us, the Global South, from achieving these goals, the entire Global South, is that it lacks finance. And that amount is now moved up to, in the words of the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, $4 trillion is urgently needed. That's a huge amount. That's exactly the size of the Indian economy currently. $4 trillion is currently needed to try and get the Global South to catch up and actually try and meet those very vital Sustainable Development Goals, to accelerate the progress on the SDGs. Those $4 trillion are absolutely essential. It's a big financing gap. Now, we need to understand that she's taken these figures from UNCTAD. And UNCTAD's developing countries have got, according to them, they said that the developing countries have got $544 billion in FDI in 2022. That is woefully low, actually. The SDGs in developing economies are stagnating as a result of that. The SDGs are, in fact, even regressing in some parts of the world. And that's not a good sign, because at the end of the day, that's really a huge gap between the haves and the have-nots is going to be created, and it's going to have an ecological imbalance as well. The Global South is affected, as we can presume, disproportionately, and there is pressure now on multilateral development banks like the World Bank and the IMF, and they have to do much more. They have to do much more in terms of giving, to finance this kind of a gap. But do they have the ability to do it? We know that these 17 SDGs, they are significant SDGs. Among them is, of course, halving global poverty, ending poverty, hunger, bringing about gender equity. All these things are extremely important, and we can see that the Global South, as we said, is affected disproportionately. There has been pressure on the World Bank and the IMF to try and improve their positions. And we do know that unless this $4 trillion is got from somewhere, the Global South is going to be moving backwards. In a sense, they're going to regress rather than progress, to be progressive. And we have with us Anil Padmanabhan, a senior economic journalist, who's going to throw light on some of these subjects with us. Thanks very much, Mr. Padmanabhan, for being with us. Let me first start by asking you, do you see the problem of the finance gap for the SDGs in the Global South being addressed on a priority?
Mark, unfortunately, it's a very short answer. It's no. And we must understand the magnitude of the challenge facing the Global South. First of all, your viewers should, I presume, know that 88% of the world's population, which is about nearly 6 billion, reside in the South. And the median age of this Global South is 25 years compared to the global average of 30 years. So you have the largest population and the youngest population residing in the Global South. So this kind of shortage of financial resources to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals is a huge challenge. In 2014, UNCTAD had estimated that this would be about 2 trillion. But with the onset of COVID and the triple crisis that the world faced, finance, food, and exchange rates, the cost has grown to something like 4.3 trillion, which is what the finance minister talked about. Now, where are these resources going to come from? They have to come primarily from the developed world. And they have not signaled any indication that they are willing to release these kind of funds. So I don't see going forward that these funds will come the way of the global south, which means in the next 6 years, they are facing an uphill task in realizing these SDG goals.
But Mr. Padmanabhan, could trade be the solution rather than aid?
Unfortunately, no, Mark, because the problem is that the same West, which we are looking to, in terms of resources, are the same segment or the cohort which has strangled global trade at this point of time. Look at the World Trade Organization. It's basically in limbo, which is forcing countries to get into bilateral or mini-lateral agreements to create trade blocs, because the World Trade Organization is unable to get all the trading countries on the same table, as it were, to negotiate some forward-looking trade agreements which could be equitable and help the global south. Secondly, most of the global south doesn't have the means to compete in global trade. So, which becomes a big challenge because they don't have the technology, they don't have the manufacturing capability, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the skilled manpower. Plus, they've got basic health challenges, deficits, which become part of the SDG. So, given all this, it becomes very difficult for them to compete, even if fair trade was allowed. So, given that the WTO is in shambles and that their inability to compete, I don't see trade as a solution.
Also, Mr. Padmanabhan, how best can multilateral development banks and institutions come to the rescue?
See, Mark, ideally they should. Historically, in the past, they have always been there to bail countries out of crisis. But, the institutions do not possess the capital base to address the financial needs of the new era, as it were. See, you're looking at the 80s, 90s, up to which point these multilateral banks had the balance sheet to lend money or to provide emergency resources. Today, their capacity is extremely restricted because the needs of the world have grown. So I don't see the multilateral institutions playing a larger role than what they're playing at present. So they'll continue to play an important role, but it can't be the sole entity which is going to be able to, carry the load, as it were.
Absolutely. So those funds have to come from somewhere and probably from the rich countries. Stay with us, Mr. Padmanabhan. We'd like your views also on this next story, which is our second lead story. The United States heads to the polls to elect its next president in less than 3 months. And the economy has been in focus, with pundits, they are predicting that there is a strong possibility of a recession. While voter surveys suggest that people generally think that Trump is better at managing the economy, the underlying issues are also far deeper. There is inclusivity, equity, economic justice, and things like that. Here's more. As politics in the United States moves into fifth gear, the economic road seems the one less traveled for voters and the main candidates alike. The election takes place in the backdrop of a US economy experiencing a mix of growth and challenges. It grew at an annual rate of 2.8% in the second quarter of 2024, up from 1.4% in the first quarter. The US economy is pumped by high consumption, inventory, and business investment. After 4 years of a Biden-Harris-led economy, former President Trump and the Republicans hope to re-establish the American entrepreneurial dream. At a rally in Pennsylvania, Trump has sought to portray Harris as extreme left on a number of policies.
And she's going to break our economy even more than it's broken. We have a broken economy. Our supply chain is gone. You order something now. I don't know how many of you are in business, or even if you're ordering as a personal order, the order doesn't come. The supply chain is broken. Who ever thought of it? We never even talked about supply chain. Supply chain just worked. And because of what they've done, they've broken our supply chain.
when American businesses threatened to shut down factories and move them to Mexico and China. Remember what Trump did? He picked up the phone and said, if you do that, I'm going to introduce you to a little word called the tariff. And a lot of American workers benefit because he was willing to fight for the interests and for their American jobs.
Inflation remains a concern, though it has moderated compared to previous years. The US Fed has been raising interest rates in an attempt to bring inflation below 3%. The unemployment rate is at 4.3% as of July 2024, with youth employment at 12.4%. There are concerns about job losses in certain sectors. Personal income and consumer spending have increased marginally, but the savings rate remains low at 3.4%. There is no immediate sign of a recession, although some experts warn of potential slowdowns. Kamala Harris and the Democrats say they plan to cut taxes for most Americans and prevent price gouging by grocers. They hope to build more affordable housing and call this an opportunity economy. Harris pledged to introduce a new child tax credit of as much as $6,000 for families with infants, cut taxes for families with kids, and lower prescription drug costs.
An economy where everyone can compete and have a real chance to succeed. Everyone, regardless of who they are or where they start, has an opportunity to build wealth for themselves and their children.
He knows what this will do: restrict our freedoms, rig the economy for the ultra-rich by punishing the middle class. If he returns to the White House, he's going to pick up just where he left off. But the people around him who worked with him the first time are already telling us it will be much, much worse.
Former President Trump suggested that Harris's proposals were akin to communist price controls, a concept he termed as the Maduro Plan. Harris told her supporters that the US economy is strong, but prices were still too high, and that she is laser-focused on the middle class. Trump and Harris will debate on September 10 on ABC, setting up the first face-to-face matchup between the rivals in what polls show is a close race. The Economic Brief, DD India. Well, Anil Padmanabhan continues to be with us. Let's understand the story from his point of view. Mr. Padmanabhan, has the Democratic Party become too left of center, for a country that prides itself on the American dream?
Mark, see, in an election campaign, a lot is to do with optics. So, some which the candidates project and some the rivals project on the candidate. So in this case, what we are seeing is a lot of the fringe group in the Democratic Party have been arguing aggressively from an extreme left position. But please remember, it's a fringe group. Largely, the Democratic Party continues to be, center, not, left of center, but not extreme left of center. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris's recent remarks have only endorsed the fringe group perception that, she is extreme left. But please remember, these are very early days. She has just inherited the mantle because this was quite unprecedented, where the current president stepped down and allowed her to be the candidate for the Democratic Party. So these are very early times and they're still sizing up. But my own belief is that the Democratic Party will remain centered, will not veer too far to the left, because that is where a large segment of their voters are. So ignore the optics and stay focused on the substance is what I would say.
And how far from reality is the Republicans' position, on protecting American jobs when America itself, is supposed to be the champion of globalization?
See, Mark, upfront we must understand America is only a champion of itself, which is nothing wrong with it. Every country should do precisely that. So when they embraced globalization, it was because they were they anticipated gains that will accrue to them. China became the factory of the world, cost of goods came down, so America rode on that wave of low inflation. But subsequently, the economics changed, and globalization became a sword which was beginning to damage the United States because jobs were being lost, factories were being moved out of the United States. So beginning with the Obama era, the rethink began on globalization. So today they don't oppose globalization, but they don't champion it anymore. But at the same time, now every political party is aspiring or claiming to protect jobs. But frankly, jobs is a crisis not just in the United States, it's all over the world.
Okay.
So it is not something that's going to be a magic wand to this. Every politician will claim whatever they want. But once you are in power, you'll stare at the realities and they're quite different. So watch what they promise and scrutinize them for what they can deliver.
And finally, do you see the US economy going into recession?
See, Mark, this is a fear that has been voiced for nearly a year. Mercifully, the new inflation numbers show a weakening of the inflation trend, which means the US Fed will consider a rate cut probably next month. And that is very important. So the worst is probably over. It's not that the economy is going to trade up from here on, but at least the trajectory towards a recession seems to have eased for the moment. Now, please remember the people have been suffering from inflation because the Fed had to raise interest rates, which meant mortgage costs went up. And now we are beginning to see a trend where the jobs growth, which was pretty healthy for most of this phase, has begun to taper off. It's not in negative territory, but it's not growing at the rate that it was growing, say, in the last quarter. So the big concern on inflation is fading, but a new challenge of jobs is emerging. And please remember, this is election time, so it becomes a very contentious issue.
Thanks very much, Mr. Anil Padmanabhan. Thank you very much for joining us and enlightening us on these stories. Now, continuing with the economic brief, well, Argentina is witnessing significant economic shifts as President Javier Milei implements a series of measures to combat chronic inflation. Recent reports reveal monthly inflation dipped to 4% for July, marking the lowest level since early 2022. But the annual inflation rate remains staggering at more than 200%. Now, many Argentinians remain wary of the long-term impacts of these austerity measures. This is the measures taken by President Milei. Let's look at this report.
Argentinians are feeling both hopeful and wary as monthly price rises dip to their lowest in over 2 years amid tough austerity under President Javier Milei. Argentina's battle with inflation has been one of the most severe in the world, with annual rates surpassing 263%. However, recent data from the country's Index Statistics Agency offered a rare glimmer of hope. In July, inflation slowed to 4%, the lowest monthly increase since early 2022. This dip is seen by many as a sign that President Milei's aggressive economic policies might be starting to yield results. President Javier Milei, who came to power in late 2023, has implemented a series of sharp cost-cutting measures to stabilize the country's embattled economy. These measures include significant cuts to state spending, reduction of subsidies, and downsizing of the public sector. The reduction from over 25% monthly inflation in December to 4% in July 2024 is significant, but the long-term effects of Milei's policies remain uncertain.
Terrible, es increíble.
It's terrible. It's incredible how every time you try to maintain a lifestyle, you fall and fall. I also see that shop owners try to survive however they can with sales. And the truth is, it's not enough.
I am tired. Without a doubt, there is a different situation from what we have seen so far. It brings hope, but for it to happen is something different. At least that is what we sense today. What will happen, only God knows.
Argentinians are cautiously optimistic, hoping that this downward trend in inflation might signal the beginning of a more stable economic future. Ultimately, Argentina's path to recovery will depend on its leaders' ability to navigate these complex and interrelated challenges. The Economic Brief, DD India.
Well, that brings us to the end of this program. We leave you with 10 key business stories. And from all of us here at the Economic Brief, thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.
Zomato to acquire Paytm's entertainment and ticketing business for $244 million as the food delivery giant looks diversify beyond food delivery. South Korea's central bank kept interest rates unchanged at 3.50% for the 13th straight meeting, the longest freeze in the central bank's history. Inflation in South Africa fell to its lowest level in 3 years in July to 4.6% from 5.1% in June. Qatar Airways Group acquired 25% stake in Southern Africa's premier independent regional carrier Air Link. The investment would boost Qatar Airways' access to passengers in Africa. Bolivians protested against government over rising food prices and persistent fuel and dollar shortages that have disrupted the country's economy. Switzerland has launched instant payment scheme to bolster the future of cashless payments in the country. UK government's borrowing jumped by $4.04 billion in July, stoking fresh anxiety for the new Labour government ahead of its first budget. The multinational fashion retailer H&M will close down digital fashion outlet found later this year due to weak demand. American retail corporation Target raised its full-year profit by 2.7% year-over-year to $25.5 billion, surpassing analyst expectations of $25.2 billion. And sunflower oil has surpassed olive oil as the top kitchen choice in Spain due to soaring prices. Spaniards bought 179 million litres of sunflower oil in the first half of 2024 compared to 107 million litres of olive oil.